that's for me, living life so merrily. It's so easy, can't you see? Polka, polka, that's for me. Polka, polka, everyone come along, it's lots of fun.
Welcome back to Talk and Shoot Podcast. I'm Miguel Dorati, your host. The podcast here is the MMA scene, and we're going to take a look at UFC 189. I got my sidekick co-host Mike Davis with me. Mike, you aboard?
Look out, man. Ready to knock this one out.
All right, we're going to have some fun here because, you know, the UFC 189 fight, Conor McGregor and Jose Aldo is the main event. It's the featherweight title fight. It's been the most fight hyped in UFC history. It's been announced, you know, for roughly 6 months at least.
I'd say this one has got more hype behind it than when Lesnar, came and fought for the UFC.
You know, it's up there, but what you get more of a feel for this one is the international feel for it, and I think that makes it bigger in scope. I agree with you.
I agree. Yeah.
But it's interesting for another couple of reasons now that you bring it up here. In our last podcast, which we were discussing the MMA scene, we were talking a lot about Bellator, but one of the things that we mentioned about this UFC fight is that it's pretty much a foolproof fight. We compared it to the Kimbo Slice Ken Shamrock fiasco that Bellator, put on of similar scope or, wannabe as big. And, we said, even if the UFC gets a 30-second fight, it's been hyped the right way. The guys have handled it well.
Yeah, it's credible.
And it was a credible fight, so even if it went short or something hokey happened, people weren't going to leave with the sad feeling they got a Bellator. But anyway, the point is now, since that podcast, there's been announced an injury to Jose Aldo. Aldo took a rib injury, and it's been a couple of days now, and it's still sitting there. And it appears he wants to do the fight. It appears that the UFC's not ruling out the fight. So it's this pregnant waiting to see what actually happens. And that was
scramble. Can you imagine?
It's a dangerous situation. That's what the whole reason for this podcast is, I think. You really got to look at this the right way. And there have been some good perspectives on it up on the internet already. Yeah, the UFC's not stepping up to cancel the fight, obviously. McGregor...
I think they're working pretty hard behind the scenes.
Yeah.
In order to even, just kind of like do a handshake deal to go, hey, just don't pull out. This is what's going to happen. But if you really look at the grand scope of, of the entire situation, if Jose Aldo were to lose, financially for Jose, this would be the best thing to happen to him. Because that rematch would be monstrous.
Yeah, we're going to get into some of the finances around this thing because that's a big factor in many of the ways. The other reason you kind of know you're in a serious situation here is McGregor's silence, really. He's not saying much or anything like that. And, obviously what sets him apart from everybody else is his outspoken nature, and for him not to say anything really hints that there's something going on in the background. But let's just talk about what we're dealing with here. We have an injury, and let's say, Aldo had kept it under wraps and done the fight.
It surprises me. Well, why do you think they announced that? Do you think it was like a leak from the camp?
Well, I don't know. That could very well be a leak from the camp. The first bit of misinformation that came out, or still open question, is it was described as a fractured rib at first, and then it was only a bruised rib. So, somewhere around there, some of the things have gone back and forth, and they're open issues, I think. But here's the question: is he keeps it under wraps, let's say, and then he fights and he loses the belt, and he comes out and says, I hurt my rib 3 weeks earlier in training. Aren't we in a Manny Pacquiao situation now where, Pacquiao got destroyed. He got, he's being sued and all kinds of things. And actually, everybody lost on the Pacquiao-Mayweather fight simply because, it wasn't a great fight. And then he comes out and makes an excuse and makes everything look worse. And people said Pacquiao should have told people, pulled out and told people that the injury had occurred. And so aren't we almost in a similar situation anyway? The weird thing is here, yeah, we do know in advance. But now, inevitably, he's hurt going into the fight. He's not going to be 100%. I'm still not, now I have a choice, I guess, to not buy the pay-per-view because I don't feel like I'm going to get my money's worth. But I feel like they could wait for the circumstances to be 100% on both sides.
What's shocking to me is, all right, NHL hockey comes along. While he's got an upper body injury, a lower body injury, he's dealing with something. You never really reveal where your issues are. And, Miguel, you've been around a fight game for years. So anyone that's walking into that cage, if you're like 90 to 100% walk into that cage, you didn't train hard enough. You're going to have your dings, your bruises, your soreness. That's just like a part of the process of getting yourself ready for a big fight, especially a main event. It's such a high level. But to sit here and go, well, I injured my ribs, but I'm still going to fight. I mean, it's like legit. This isn't like him playing, hey, kick me in the ribs. It's going to open you up for this. I don't really see this as being like, just a method of him trying to defeat him just by making Conor McGregor do things that he wants him to do. I think he's legitimately banged up, and for it to even get a press release like this is insane. Like, it doesn't even make sense. Like,
yeah, I mean, when it gets out,
pull out or don't, or shut up.
Here's the thing. It's hard to generalize, and with Jose Aldo in particular, I don't know Jose personally. I wasn't in the business when he rose, and I don't know him, but I do know his coach, Pederneiras, Andre. Andre chose some of my events to debut some of his black belts many years ago, Sheldon Ribeiro. I've worked with House and Mora. I know him in his school very well, and he's dealing with a chaotic situation there. Only because Aldo, he's got a long history of delaying fights and pulling out of fights and falling on his moped.
He's pulled out of like four fights up until this time, and
and I mean the
moped.
moped.
Screaming about his contract. He's not a happy employee over there.
Well, the contract's a little bit of a different story, but it also plays into what I want to talk about here, mainly because of this. Jose Aldo's probably a kid that doesn't have an education, and that makes it hard because you have a chaotic life. Like, he doesn't understand, all the implications of the contract he signed, and that, maybe he shouldn't be riding a moped and things like that. But I'm not saying he's dumb at all. And I think that sometimes when you're a champion and you've won 6 or 8 in a row, and you're looking around and Anderson Silva's got what he's getting, and you're not getting the same thing, I think he's asking some questions that may have some root, in truth. So I'm not putting Jose Aldo down, but I am saying that it's a very chaotic situation in terms of the management of those guys because of their capabilities with education. Now they have money. What do they spend it on? Are they good kids? Are they bad kids? Are they disciplined in training?
And the distractions become tenfold. I agree.
And that's how things get out of control. And they've just recently had the Renan Barão situation, the former bantamweight champion, who's kind of come apart a little bit, and no one talks about him in the pound for pound lists anymore. And is Jose Aldo heading down the same path? So, but here's the problem is, so now we don't know about the injury. Conor McGregor comes out, kicks him in the ribs. Jose Aldo falls 30 seconds, and the fight is over.
Man, that place would erupt. That place would erupt.
It would be insane. And then the next day, Jose Aldo in the press release says, I injured my ribs 3 weeks ago. I need a rematch. You kind of got to give him a rematch because he's been the long-time champion for so long, and he's never, that'd be a first UFC loss. So, now, we know about the injury before, as we do now. If Conor McGregor comes out, kicks him once, and the fight's over in 30 seconds, or there's an unsatisfying ending such as something like that, why wouldn't you wait to have the guy 100%? Well, I can tell you why Jose Aldo don't want to wait, and that's the finances of it. From what I've been seeing, and there was a couple of good pieces on the internet and stuff, but Aldo is one of those champions that he gets the same contract everybody else gets. But if you're not a huge draw, you're going to get less money. You know what I mean? It's similar to like when Eddie Alvarez took the Bellator contract to to court over the fact that they were saying, yeah, we're going to do. You can have you can have all the percentage of the pay-per-views that you would get with UFC and stuff, but they don't have any pay-per-view arm. We'll do one, and they got away with it, in that particular case. But the point is some of those pay-per-view dollars, some of those dollars, some of the ability to say we'll do the same thing in a contract. Hey, they could tell Jose Aldo, your contract's identical to Anderson Silva. But Anderson Silva gets more opportunities as far as like coaching on TV, gets more opportunities as far as other marketing and media, and gets pushed as the greatest fighter of all time. I don't think Jose Aldo found himself with enough money to rent a mansion in Los Angeles or have a mansion in Vegas and living the lifestyle Anderson Silva leads now. It has to do with pay-per-view buys and some of the other aspects of the contract. So Aldo, as a guy with limited marketability, everybody has their fans and stuff like that. He's a very good fighter. His communication skills are poor. He's kind of chaotic in terms of trying to, keep him organized.
He's not an easy guy to deal with. I mean, just based on like his press releases and stuff like that, he's someone that you kind of grit your teeth. But I mean, he does have a pretty big fan base.
The UFC would be glad to have him lose. That's the other.
Without a doubt.
So we know the UFC probably just wants to do this fight and get it done. But if he's hurt and there's an unsatisfying ending, you're in a Manny Pacquiao Mayweather situation where it's just going to be critical after critical after critique after critique, and it's just not going to be anything positive that you're getting from the fight you hype the most in your history. So I'm almost thinking a postponement is the right thing to do. Now,
if you're Jose Aldo, yeah. If you're the UFC, absolutely not.
Well,
that belt around McGregor, oh my God.
And here's another thing. It's in Las Vegas where. What are the relations? Vegas is a town that it just seems like it's built on who you know and relationships and important things of that nature. And, what should happen here is that the Boxing Commission should execute a medical exam on Jose Aldo, and a doctor, without any influence, should decide whether he's ready to compete or not. And therefore, could possibly hold up the license. That is nowhere near happening. You know what I mean? If the fighters show up on the week of the fight, this fight's going down. This commission doesn't have the balls to say, "Look, this kid got kicked in the ribs."
Either would I.
Just asking the same questions I'm asking. Look, I followed this situation. The first initial press report said fracture. After that, it was toned down to bruise. I am now the medical person authorized that is needed to clear this person to enter into a match. I need to know if it's fractured or bruised. If it's fractured, you cannot go in the ring. I mean, unfortunately, the finances can't come into that decision, but they will. You're right, they will. But that's what's missing in all of this structure is that command authority. Because with a buddy system, it's better to just look the other way and make excuses later.
Yeah, I agree. You know what interests me, and I know this is kind of way off topic. Joe Duffy, who has got the only win over Conor McGregor in the UFC. And what I would also like to see is, was it Luis Acevedo, who's got a rear naked choke win over Jose Aldo? I'd like to see him in there too. I'd like to see the guys that beat them at least get a shot. Duffy's already got it. Acevedo, like his last 4 fights, I think he's about 500, but he's certainly somebody that you can put a little marketing behind, and if you can put someone over, those would be good names to do it based on, their body of work in the past. I also noticed with the sports book that Conor McGregor is actually the favor.
Yeah, I noticed that myself.
It doesn't even make sense to me.
That recently, that was not the case just a couple of short days ago. The fight opened with Aldo slightly 2-1 favorite, a little bit more than 2-1 favorite, and it's been coming down ever since. Just last week, before the injury was announced, I was actually looking at it, and it had McGregor at plus 125.
That's insane.
And now he's at minus 135 and the favorite in the fight.
That's insane.
And, it plays into the fact that the injury is really to McGregor's played it smart and that he's been quiet. He hasn't questioned anything yet. The problem for McGregor is this: it's just gonna, and the problem for McGregor's title reign is going to be the same as the Anderson Silva effect for Chris Weidman. Is people are always going to say, "Oh, he was hurt, and he's going to have to win another one to justify it."
So where's Aldo at number-wise?
In what?
Right now, in terms of the odds.
He's at just about plus 110.
All right, now I don't gamble, like at all. I don't drink, don't gamble, and that plus 110. If I did gamble, man, that would just be one of those juicy bets that I would almost think of putting money down on.
But would you now with this injury? Would you still consider that?
I would, yeah.
I would. I have a feeling this is the issue here. Jose Aldo, and this is where Andre Pederneiras is a genius in terms of he's got several generations of top level black belts in jiu-jitsu and several generations of top level MMA artists that come from him. And, people are going to remember him in his older age when he fought in the UFC, but he's also, fought himself. And I respect the man as a true, expert and pioneer in the sport. And, with all that said, keeping Aldo in line for this fight, for these last 3 weeks, he should also be asking him to pull out of the fight. But the fight's going to go down.
Yeah, if he can get an immediate rematch clause, he drops that fight. Let's just say, how much money do you think Jose is going to make on this bout? It's just a rough guesstimate ballpark.
It's probably is going to be his first 7-figure payday.
I agree with that. Now, if he were to lose, that rematch would probably put him at the $4 or $5 million range.
Yeah, because here's the thing is Aldo's been perfect for a long time, and he seems to skate on thin ice with some of the crazy stuff, like he hurt his ankle driving around, like the moped thing is always stuck in my head, So
yeah, it's insane.
In the lead up to this fight, with the last 3 weeks in, he comes in. Of course, if you could talk to him about a rematch and stuff, but that implies he has to lose, and really the best scenario or the technical best way for Aldo to win is to come in, get him to the ground, and on the ground do something tricky that McGregor gets caught in, as has happened to him in his 2 losses. And the guys, you assume, this is part of my speech about Pederneiras and his pedigree, is you assume that if he's been submitted by arm triangles by a couple of guys fast, that Aldo at his level will be able to get him out of there pretty quick as well. And, that would be the type of situation where everybody says, Aldo's great. McGregor was a hyped up guy from the UFC who has, machine who hasn't done anything. And, McGregor goes back into the pack. Now, for McGregor, if McGregor wins the belt and Aldo is injured and stuff, he always will have the questions of, he's going to need the rematch to justify it or another win. And to me, McGregor was a guy who, with a clean win, goes to lightweight. I think the weight cut he doesn't need to do anymore. He's big, and that would be the next.
He goes up a weight class?
He's talked about it himself. He's actually mentioned the welterweight class as well. He's big, you're talking about potentially a man with a plan there. Hey, if you can pull it off and be a 3-weight class champion in the UFC.
Jesus, it's not going to happen.
No. But I mean, he's a guy who thinks big, and
right.
You know what I mean.
Right.
And so I'm not. But a lot of that gets stalled. He would be stuck at featherweight for at least another fight for the rematch, or at least a justification fight with Edgar or something like that, which could go wrong for him right away. Move to lightweight. We'll see what happens at lightweight. Maybe that's where he stalls because the guys there are bigger and whatever. But he wanted to move right away. I think if Aldo wins the fight either way, Aldo should go to lightweight. Nobody, in many ways, Chad Mendes reminds me of Amir Khan. I mean, he's always talking about how he wants a title fight and stuff like that. And he's the only person talking about a title fight for him, you know? He's already lost twice. He's not even in the neighborhood. And I'm not that interested until Aldo leaves the weight class and seeing him in another title fight. He can hold court there. Edgar's a little more interesting, but he's already beaten Edgar as well. Aldo would probably be on his way to lightweight with a win.
Well, on a side note, do you think outside of BJ Penn and excluding the 205 and heavyweights, do you think there's going to be another multiple weight champion anytime soon?
John Jones, I thought, may be the best bet, you know.
Going up to heavyweight?
He was talking about it. Cormier could go back to heavyweight, you know, in a reasonable sense.
I mean, you subtract those two. You know, you subtract 205 and heavyweight. Those are the easiest ones to do.
Okay.
I'm talking like Mighty Mouse. You see Mighty Mouse going up to 135 and competing for that title?
You know, Mighty Mouse could. I don't know if he wins it. I don't know if he wins it, but he could. In terms of what you got to consider with him is he fought a great deal of his career as big as 155 because of just not being able to find, you know, competition and people who ran the 125-pound weight class. So he's been absolutely dominant at 125, and maybe now a move back to 135. He's already tasted 135, has some decent, you know, wins against decent guys all along his resume. It's not like he's, you know, going to be lost. So, yeah, Demetrius Johnson, I think, could do it. Could Dillashaw move up? I think the change from 135 to 145 is a big change. You get a lot of bigger guys there.
That power is a big difference in power.
I think the same applies from the jump to welter to middle. I don't see any of the welters. You know, Lombard isn't even champion. He's suspended for a year, but Lombard is a good example, I think, of what would happen to most of those guys at middleweight, and that they would be average. And, you know, that includes Johnny Hendricks and the like. Now, there's two guys at middleweight who could potentially impact at light heavyweight, and that's, you know, Rockhold and Weidman, just because they're so big and long that they might be able to handle the change.
I'd like to see Weidman go up, and you know, Weidman seems like a go-getter too. Like he's one of those. I mean, he's also made reference to moving up and doing a super fight. Like out of all the guys wearing the strap, very few are like, oh, it gets thrown around. Yeah, maybe a super fight, and it's just like they're kind of like touching their toe in the water, but they're not really committed to diving in. And Weidman absolutely seems like the type of guy that would dive in deep waters, like and enjoy it and love it.
Yeah, and I mean, you didn't mention. I like Weidman. The problem with Weidman has been the injury bug a little bit. He hasn't been as active as we'd like to see, and now he's stalled in a situation where, at some point, fighting 2 times a year, his whole body of work is going to be short because he doesn't have a lot of fights. But I do like Weidman if he can stay healthy. The point I missed...
It seems like he's settling in, too, to the position of being champion. Like, he's accepted it mentally. He's not getting the adrenaline dumps that he did in the Silva fight.
Let's see what he looks like against Rockhold.
Rockhold. Oh, my God. I can't wait for that fight, man.
It could be a good fight. It should be a good fight.
I think so, too, man.
But let me pause it because I didn't even mention welterweight champion Bobby Lawler. Lawler's another good example. I think Lawler may have, if I'm wrong on this, correct me, but Lawler may have held the Strikeforce belt at 185. But again, Lawler is going to come up. I think some of his losses were to legit 185ers, like Rockhold, Jacare, and some of those. I'm not looking at his record right now, but he can compete at a high level. But he in the UFC, I think he would fall short in being a 2. Lawler has a chance too, you have to say, though, because he's got pedigree at 185.
It's surprising to see Lawler still fighting today because he's such an old school guy, especially at the level he's fighting. But the amount of maturity that you've seen come out of him is pretty impressive.
I agree. I remember
when he first came on the scene, he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, and I just think it was attitude. But when you're the alpha male, you're going to have attitude.
Well,
There's going to be territorial pissings and things of that nature. But his maturity, man, is incredibly impressive.
He came up from the Midwest scene, and
from old Pat Miletich days.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You had Pat there, and then you had the rise of Matt Hughes and stuff. And, everybody there, all of the above were managed by Monty Cox. So what does that tell you?
I think there was a little fallout between Monty and Pat over Robbie, from what I remember.
It could, but all the politics still. When Robbie stays with Monty as his manager, Monty was always going to be having Matt Hughes ahead of him on the pecking order. It's just the way it was going to be. So that I think kept him, in the early part of his career from maybe moving in. And I think you're right. I think the maturity he's showing as a champion now, I think it may be paying off for him now. He's still relatively young. He's got a long list of very, very tough guys, all along on his resume. And you got to remember, back from those old days, there were several guys like Bobby Lawler. And Bobby's the one who's still here. Some of the other guys you don't hear of anymore, you know what I mean? And they're gone. And I'm talking about, guys that were promising guys. One of them recently tried a comeback that comes to mind was Benji Raddick. Another guy, nearing that level, let's say.
Was tough.
I mean, he was comparable to Bobby Lawler. Maybe he doesn't have the chin Bobby has, but he was comparable to Bobby Lawler. There were a couple other of those Midwest wrestlers, that were considered on the level. Jason Black is another name. I don't know if you remember Jason, but
no, Jason Black was real good, but he was just way too one-dimensional. I saw him and Gideon Murray fight at the Hammond Civic Center, and that guy just didn't have an ounce of fat on him. I think he worked for the railroad.
Yeah, no, he was a tough kid. I think his record still, he hasn't fought obviously in 8 years.
Philip Miller's another one.
Yeah, Philip Miller, he was from Arizona.
But he got the wins.
Yeah, he was from Arizona though. He's not from Monty. I'm just trying to think of guys from the Midwest that didn't, that were at one point considered on par with Bobby Lawler. You know what I mean? And Lawler is the one who's still around. I do like the discipline he's been bringing along, and I would have to rate him having a shot at the 185-pound title just because of his pedigree and stuff. Guys like Chad Saunders from back then, those guys were all excellent wrestlers and stuff, but Lawler's the one that's left. Anyway, that's been a UFC roundup. We did a real good look at the UFC's next show. It's coming up July 11th out of Las Vegas. One way or another, as of right now, the main event is Jose Aldo and Conor McGregor. The co-main event, which could turn into... I'm
excited. I'm going to buy that, Miguel. I'm buying that.
It's worth it. Robbie Lawler and...
The last two Cormier fights. I'm actually... You're talking to somebody that hasn't really been involved financially speaking in terms of purchasing things from the UFC for a little bit. They've got my attention again. I'm spending my money on UFC pay-per-views again. I am appreciative and enjoy the direction that they're going.
They went through a little bit of a down period. I think they still would like to see the numbers pick up again as well. But I think you're right. In general, with the ramped up schedule, there have been some weaker shows. I think the UFC has a very good balance going of, the weaker shows have something usually at least interesting, and if not, at least they're on free TV, whereas when you're buying the pay-per-views, they've tried to put at least 2 title fights on them this year and make them, worthy of the money. So, anyway, the next one, like I said, is July 11th. It's Jose Aldo taking on Conor McGregor. You got Rory McDonald challenging Robbie Lawler for the 170-pound title. And, that fight deserves a podcast onto itself. But let's wrap this week up, and we will...
Great co-main event. Absolutely great co-main event. You got to buy the card.
Yeah, if it becomes the main event or we got to crank out another podcast, we'll get deeper into that. But for right now, I'm signing off. This is Miguel Dorati for Mike Davis on the Talk and Shoot podcast, and we have been Talk and Shoot.